Welcome to our On the Issues Justice in the Time of COVID. My name is Derek Mosley. I am the director of the Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education right here at Marquette Law School. Thank you for coming. A few announcements I want to make. Christine said a couple of them, but I want to let you know about some future programming that we have here today coming up in the Lubar Center. October 11th, we have our Get to Know program where we bring in individuals from the community that affect your life on a daily basis that you may or may not know. October 11th is Jackie Carter. She is the director of the Port of Milwaukee. She is the first African-American female to hold that position. So she will be here on October 11th. As Christine mentioned, October 12th, we'll have Representative Mike Gallagher from the 8th District of Wisconsin to come here for On the Issues, one-on-one between myself and him. And on October 20th, we have an On the Issues with Kara Fitzpatrick. She's the author of the book Death of Public School, and we're going to have an education program in regards to that book as well. Today we are here for Under Pressure, Justice in the Time of COVID. The Argosy Foundation, based here in Milwaukee, as well as the Milwaukee County Community Justice Council, had commissioned the Wisconsin Policy Forum to do a report on the justice system in the time of COVID. The Wisconsin Policy Forum is a nonpartisan, independent research organization which does a lot of research projects in regards to state and local governments as well as school districts here in Wisconsin. I'm going to introduce our panel. We're going to start off with a short PowerPoint presentation describing the report that some of you I see have had in your hands. It was we had an attachment to the announcement. So for those of you who aren't able to see the whole report, we'll have a brief synopsis before we get started. But I want to introduce our panel. To my immediate left, we have Rob Henken, who is president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum. We have the regional managing attorney of the Milwaukee State Public Defender's Office, Tom Reed. We have former Chief Judge and now Director of the Andrews Center for Restorative Justice here at the law school, Mary Triggiano. Next to Mary, we have Judge Carl Ashley, who is now the Chief Judge of the Milwaukee County Court System. Next to Judge Ashley, we have the Milwaukee County District Attorney, John Chisholm. And then next to District Attorney Chisholm, we have Milwaukee Police Chief Jeffrey Norman. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with a short PowerPoint presentation to give a brief synopsis of the report. After that synopsis, we will go into a Q&A between myself and the members of the panel. Rob?
Thank you, Derek, and thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you to the law school for putting on this very provocative program. Yes, I am going to, in 10 minutes or less, try to summarize a very data-intensive 34-page report. The full report, in addition to your having a synopsis, the full report is available on our website, which is wispolicyforum.org. What did we do here? The purpose of this report, commissioned, again, by the Argosy Foundation and the Milwaukee CJC, was to take a look at a function of government that arguably was the most heavily impacted by the pandemic. Think about all of the government functions and then think about the justice system, everything from policing to prosecuting to publicly defending to judging, and the amount of face-to-face personal interaction that has to go on to do all of those elements. And I think it's easy to think about how arguably this function, more than any other, was heavily impacted by the pandemic. So we know that. That is a given. Our key research question, as this slide says, was to really try to get at, number one, what was the depth and the nature of that upheaval, and to what extent has that upheaval been reversed over time as the impacts of the pandemic have subsided, as we have more or less returned to a pre-pandemic normal, and obviously everything is not back to normal. We wanted to see how the workings of the justice system had been impacted and the extent to which things had now recovered. And so I'm going to take you through certain key pressure points on the justice system pipeline. The report contains far more data points than I'm going to describe to you today. What I really want to focus on are 4 specific areas that we found to not only have been the most heavily impacted, but also to have shown the least amount of recovery in many respects as the pandemic has begun to subside. So I'm going to start with the very end point. If you think of the justice system pipeline, a spectrum like this, left to right, the first point is the actual reporting of an offense to the Milwaukee Police Department and to other police departments in the county. And so this is the one data point that actually wasn't one of our 4 key findings, but you have to use this one to sort of set the stage for that funnel, for that the amount of volume coming into the pipeline. So the first question is, what happened with reported offenses heading into the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic, and then in the beginnings of the emergence from the pandemic? And so what we are showing you on this slide is county-wide data. The period that we are looking at for the most part is 2018 through 2022. So one critical caveat is that during the course of our research, really the most recent data that we had available to us was data through December 31st, 2022. Obviously, more than 8 months have now elapsed in 2023. I'm confident that our panelists can give us some perspective on the extent to which some of the things I'll be talking about maybe have rebounded a little bit more during the first several months of 2023. But starting with offenses, the story here is that if you just look at January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2022, there was about a 4.1% increase countywide in Part 1 offenses. You will see that we have offenses, and this is the way offenses are reported to the federal government, to the FBI. They're divided up into Part 1 offenses, which are more serious offenses, obvious ones like murder, violent assault, and so forth. There are also Part 2 offenses, which are less serious offenses, but still several of them are serious nonetheless. But starting with Part 1, we saw a 4.1% increase over the period. But just looking at that 4.1% increase over the period doesn't do justice to what happened when we saw an absolute explosion in motor vehicle thefts starting midway through 2020 and continuing really through the end of 2021. There's been a lot written and discussed about this. The good news is, and so what this is showing you, this graph, is motor vehicle theft offenses by month. The dark blue line is Milwaukee, so the Milwaukee Police Department. The royal blue line is the other 20 law enforcement agencies that reported for all 5 years to the FBI their data. So we're talking about 18 other municipalities, the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, and the Marquette University Police Department. And what you can see here is that really it was Milwaukee that drove this rather remarkable spike, but that the good news was that by the end of 2022, things had started to return sort of to normal. So here we're just showing you the motor vehicle thefts. If you had looked at all Part 1 offenses, again, you would have seen a 4.1% increase over the period countywide. Now, the next point, after offenses have been reported, the next key data point is arrests. And what we are seeing here is that despite this slight increase in in offenses countywide, we saw a rather precipitous drop in Part 1 arrests. So a 4.1% increase in Part 1 offenses, but a 27.2% decrease in Part 1 arrests. And furthermore, what is interesting about this, and this chart is showing you it's tracking it month by month over the 5-year period, is that this drop really began prior to the pandemic. It began in 2019. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a few moments. But in this case, it started before the pandemic, and then it even continued in 2022 when the impacts of the pandemic were subsiding. For all of the data in this report, we have the ability to drill down into Milwaukee alone, and then collectively, for much of it, for Part 2 offenses and arrests, we don't have the ability to do this, but for much of the data, we can then look at the other 20 law enforcement agencies as a whole. What we're doing in this chart is showing you what happened in the city of Milwaukee. So we are showing Milwaukee Police Department Part 1 arrests and offenses by year. And in this table, we are excluding also, we are showing you in the second and fourth columns, what does this look like if you exclude motor vehicle thefts? Because we know something was going on with motor vehicle thefts. We also know that motor vehicle offenses typically have a pretty low percentage of arrests for a variety of reasons. So our thinking was, boy, this spike in motor vehicle thefts really may have skewed these numbers. But as you can see here, even when we exclude motor vehicle arrests, MPD's arrests declined far more rapidly than its offenses. So what's going on here? We'll get to that in a second, and we don't entirely know. But clearly, this is of note that arrests are down in the city of Milwaukee. And the story gets even more notable when we look at Part 2 crimes and arrests. So what this is showing you is, what's most consequential here is that royal blue line. When we look at Part 2 arrests, first of all, I should note that Part 2 offenses were up about 26% in the city of Milwaukee, but Part 2 arrests were down even more precipitously than Part 1 arrests at 61%. And one of the theories that was suggested to us by the department that sounded very plausible to us was, well, maybe because of the desire not to have to bring as many individuals down to the jail or to district substations to be booked, that the Milwaukee Police Department was issuing a greater number of citations. We actually found that citations were down as well. So again, something is going on here in terms of this decline in arrests. Let's go to our second key area, and that is district attorney charge rates. Here we're using publicly available data from the district attorney's office. Now, it would certainly stand to reason that because of the substantial decline in arrests, we would see a substantial decline in the number of charges filed by the Milwaukee County District Attorney. And that was indeed the case. But what we also found that was of note is that charge rates had dropped. This really began in the first year of the pandemic, and one would have expected that. So much more difficult during the height of the pandemic for prosecutors to maintain contact with victims and witnesses and so forth. So much more difficult during the height of the pandemic for Milwaukee police officers and investigators to assemble what is needed to bring charges. So you would have expected, perhaps, that decline from 2019 to 2020, but as you can see, for both felonies, which are the darker blue, and misdemeanors, which are the royal blue, we saw a continued decline in charge rates in 2022 as the pandemic subsided. The third thing I want to point out to you, case dispositions. We were very curious to know whether there had been a change in the way that cases were being resolved in the courts, both during the pandemic and as we emerged from the pandemic. And so here we are seeing the bottom two lines, so the lighter green and the royal blue, refer to the royal blue is felony dismissals, the lighter green is misdemeanor dismissals. We can see a steady rise in both felony and misdemeanor dismissal rates from 2019 to 2021, and only a slight recovery in 2022. So more cases being dismissed. The two lines at the top are looking at misdemeanor and felony guilty pleas. It stands to reason if there are going to be more dismissals, there are going to be fewer guilty pleas. So this is something that stands out, that we saw this big increase, and as of the end of 2022, we had not yet seen much recovery, though the beginning of recovery in terms of dismissals. Finally, I want to point out another key finding, which is the backlog of cases by the circuit courts or in the circuit courts. And so the dark blue here are felonies, the lighter blue misdemeanors. Again, completely intuitive that we would have seen a backlog grow during those peak 12 to 15 months of the pandemic because the proceedings of the courts were in such upheaval. What we would have hoped to see was what we indeed did see with the misdemeanor backlog. So at any given point of time, there's going to be a quote-unquote backlog. It refers to the number of pending cases, and there are always going to be, in this case, at the beginning of the period, there were roughly 2,000 pending misdemeanor cases and 3,200 pending felony cases. Again, you would have expected to see those lines go way up in 20 and 21. You would have hoped that they would have come down in 2022. That's precisely what happened with misdemeanors, but it had not yet happened with felonies by the end of 2022. So this also is of note. So what's going on? I can't tell you what's going on. We at the Wisconsin Policy Forum, we like to use data. We much prefer being able to use quantitative research as opposed to qualitative research to draw any conclusions. I think that's why the Marquette Law School has assembled this terrific panel of people who know a heck of a lot more than I do about what's going on. But we talked to each of these individuals. We talked to other stakeholders within the justice system, and there's just a few points I want to leave you with that posits a few possible explanations for some of this. So why are arrests down? Well, this is one of the most striking charts in our entire report. It shows what has happened with priority 1 calls. That's the sort of royal blue number. Priority 1 calls to dispatch are essentially emergency calls for service. All other calls is the darker blue. And then dispatchers at the Milwaukee Police Department also log what is called proactive activity, when officers are out on the streets conducting proactive policing activities, interacting with citizens and witnesses and so forth, investigating things that they are observing and not responding to a call. And Chief Norman can certainly describe what proactive policing is better than I can, but those are also logged. And what we see here is an increase in priority 1 calls heading into the pandemic and really not dissipating much in 2022. And then I'll point you to those gray bars. You can see the dramatic decline in proactive policing by Milwaukee police officers. So might that be having an impact on the number of arrests that officers are able to make? If they are so busy responding to calls, and in particular emergency calls, are they unable to do the type of proactive policing that might lead to more arrests? So that certainly could be one hypothesis. And really connected to that, and connected to the capacity of the Milwaukee Police Department to be out there conducting the types of activities that might result in arrests, is the sworn strength level. And this is showing the number of sworn officers in MPD and the decline that took place over this 5-year period. Now, this is not the number of budgeted positions in the Milwaukee Police Department budget. This is the actual number of sworn officers as of the end of each of these years. And so this is a result both of budget cuts, but also a result of very high numbers of retirements. And so again, when you put together an increase in priority 1 calls, a decrease in the number of officers on the street, that clearly could be having an impact on the arrest totals. In terms of the district attorney charging rates and why they are down, well, if the ability of Milwaukee police officers to conduct proactive policing and to build cases and to send those cases to district attorneys is diminished, then that might have an impact on the ability of a prosecutor to actually prosecute and to file charges. We have in the report, I'm not going to get into it here, there have been staffing declines at the district attorney's office, and even when district attorneys have been replaced, they are younger, less experienced, and that may have an impact on whether they feel sufficient confidence as opposed to a veteran prosecutor in terms of charging. But also, we are seeing a rather precipitous decline in domestic violence charges, which is a significant portion of the caseload for the district attorney's office that district attorney's office officials believe is linked, certainly in part, to the more limited interactions with domestic violence victims and witnesses that has even continued after the pandemic has begun to subside. Finally, in terms of why are more cases being dismissed, well, it would stand to reason that if there are greater backlogs, if it takes longer for a case to make its way through the system, there will be a greater chance that witnesses cannot be located and/or that complainants will drop cases. It's possible that defense attorneys are suggesting to their clients more than they did in the past that they not plead guilty and let that case play out, because if it takes that much longer, then fortuitous circumstances might develop and the case will be dismissed. In terms of the felony backlog, there's a continued shortage of court reporters, DAs, and public defenders, which is certainly impacting the ability of those cases to be disposed of. There's been an explosion in evidence from video cameras, cell phones, computers. That takes longer for prosecutors and defense attorneys to sort through. And an increase in behavioral health disorders also can lead to longer processing time. So these are all possible explanations. So what's the bottom line? It was former Chief Judge Triggiano who was quoted in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel a couple of years ago as pointing out that the justice system is an ecosystem. So we have sort of stolen that line from the Chief Judge. I hope she doesn't prosecute from the former Chief Judge. But it's a great way of looking at it. And if there is upheaval at one point in that ecosystem, it's going to impact other points. The second point is, even though the impacts of the pandemic have subsided, we are facing an historically tight labor market, and so workforce challenges have now supplanted pandemic impacts as a second source of great upheaval for the justice system. And there may be several other factors at play. We talk in the report about the Collins settlement, which occurred in 2018, which to some extent has changed the way Milwaukee police officers operate on the street. And we have no data to back this up whatsoever, but that might be also a factor. Several of our key informants suggested that it needs to be looked at as maybe contributing to some of the changes we see at the beginning of the pipeline. But the bottom line is that those 4 points that we cite here, they are of sufficient consequence that they need to be looked into more thoroughly. There needs to be heightened monitoring as to whether those rebounds that we would have hoped for many of those are now taking place, and that progress needs to be shared. So that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. All right, so Rob, when he's mentioning and going through the charts and going through the PowerPoint slides, he was mentioning a pipeline, and the pipeline being the Milwaukee Police Department, being the District Attorney and public defenders, and then ultimately being the courts. So if we're going down that pipeline, I guess my first question, and it's important that I note this, is that at the time that this report was done, that duration of period of time, that we had gone through, it was Chief Flynn, and then it was Chief Morales, Chief Brunson, and Chief Norman was not part of that, was not at the head of the Milwaukee Police Department during that time. So I think it's important to be noted. But Chief Norman, you've had an opportunity to review the report, to see the slides that have been mentioned by Mr. Henken. I'm asking you in regards to the arrests being down, do you have what is the police department's opinion as to the reason why the arrests have been down, not only in the report, but before the pandemic and then now while you've been chief?
So first, I'd like to say thank you for being on this panel. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the report put out by the Wisconsin Policy Forum. It is important to give an overall context of what's being presented here. And one of the things I want to actually point out, which is I think notable at the end of Rob's conversation, is that there's a lot of endpoints, data that we do know, but there's a lot of things that we don't know, meaning that there's a lot of contributing factors to where we're at now and why, and looking forward to seeing more work put forth to get that clarification. Because a lot of it that I can speak about is more, I will have to say, speculative, or that I can only look back and kind of look at what were the actions of my predecessors without trying to be my predecessor, but also talk about in regards to where I came into the picture. But as always, as leader, you own everything. So one of the transitional points that we had between 2018 and 2019, when we were as a more data approach department, we had what was called CompStat. And CompStat was a particular process that was more of a quantitative than qualitative. That's one approach you might want to say. You had Johari windows, and based on how many numbers you had, those were looked at as, are you really a hard worker if you have this many numbers? If you didn't have these many numbers, you got to explain why there's not these many numbers, which really put pressure on those at the time. I was not a commander at the time, but again, to put out more numbers rather than understanding the context or the reasoning for those particular numbers. Transitioning from Flynn to Morales, there was more of what was called the shoot review. In fact, even to this point, we have now what's called the public safety review, which is a weekly review more on quality, more on specificity, more on looking at individual cases rather than just saying how many is going on in this particular district, how many is going on in this particular officer, because it's important for us to be, again, focused, to understand that it's not about the arrest per se, it's about quality arrest, those who are causing most harm. So as we're transitioning from this quantitative situation of how many FIs you did, how many arrests you have, there's more, who are we looking for and why? What is the reason to put these resources and efforts into this particular this action here? So that, again, is more anecdotal because, again, I can't speak for my predecessors, and it's not to take away because policing is an always evolving activity. You know, what is the best thing today might be something different next day. So it's not putting out my predecessors, but just trying to provide context to this. The pandemic did have a number of different issues that the report didn't point out, but in regards to that, we all had a stay-at-home order, except for public safety and our friends in the public health and also grocery stores and liquor stores. There was an issue in regards to capacity at our respective places where if you had someone under arrest, where do you take them? There was a lot of restrictions involved in that. And so we had to be a little bit, unfortunately, innovative, trying to find ways to instill and enforce, but not put too much pressure on the other parts, as it was stated here, the ecosystem, in regards to that. There's only so much space for these particular locations. I know at one point we were restricted to violent felonies, meaning those who are causing the most harm. We still have an issue with that in our community, firearm-related issues. But those were part of the stressors on the system coming from this unprecedented pandemic. You've seen all type of activities and behaviors out there that was just like, where is this coming from? And so I can talk, there's other places I want to sit there and hand it over here, but I will say that for us, this is a complex issue. We do see that data points are out points, but we still need to analyze in regards to what's all the contributing factors. Some of those things that were put up there are part of that contributing factor, but I don't believe it explains all of that, which is really important for us as a whole and you as a public to dig down and get a better understanding how we can be better and how we can address these issues coming up again if we ever, God forbid, come in this particular position of having a pandemic like that.
So moving down the line on the pipeline, District Attorney Chisholm, the report mentioned that charges were down as a result of the pandemic. What have you seen, and what are some of the causes for the charging being down so much during that period?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. So you've described it as an ecosystem, but the criminal justice system is an ecosystem within the ecosystem, right? And that means that even though any one portion of the criminal justice system is impacted by what impacts on the other colleagues and partners in that system, it's also heavily influenced by what's going on in the community at the same time. A couple of years back, you had noted criminologist Patrick Sharkey present here at the law school. He had just written a book called The Uneasy Peace. What he documented was the phenomenal reduction nationwide in violence over the last 20 years. What he attributed it to was not changes in policy from, not exclusively changes in policy and practices from police and prosecutors and courts and corrections. What he attributed it to was the unsung heroes of the community, those resources that often went completely unrecognized, that were able to do some of the prevention intervention work early on and detect problems before they required intervention from law enforcement. That got wiped out. That was wiped out in March of 2020. And as a consequence, what has also been described as a pipeline, two brilliant authors, Professors Reed and Chisholm, wrote an article describing the system as a funnel. And our premise was that the criminal justice system has been more than metaphorically a funnel for all of the community's problems, and that we can't allow that to continue. In other words, when people have mental health issues, they get funneled into the criminal justice system. When they have addiction issues, they get funneled into the criminal justice system. And what we argued is that even with the limited diversionary paths that we had, the irrigation outlets, the spillways, to try to reduce some of that pressure, well, again, all of those got shut down in March of 2020. And as a consequence, the funnel just started spilling all over the place. And it's continued. The effects of that have been dramatic. It's impacted on everything. And the one thing that we've noticed more than anything else is in homicides and non-fatal shootings. You can't avoid that issue. If you shut down all of the ability to do that proactive policing, to put extra time into cases to help solve some of those, but if all you're doing is responding as a first responder in the fire services or in the police services, if all you're doing is literally picking up bodies, whether they're overdoses, whether they're non-fatal shootings, the homicides, the domestic violences, the child abuse cases, the sexual assaults. If all you're doing is responding, you can't do that proactive work. And if you're doing it with less people and less experienced people, you're going to have a tough time getting back on top of things. I often argue what I would love to see is for us to get back to the crappy location we were in 2019, right? And that meant that we had a lot of work to do, but we had enough capacity to do the public health intervention model, right? We could do some proactive community policing, community prosecution, community partnership. You had innovations taking place in the community where you were trying to expand that capacity. Again, all of those have been grossly under-resourced. If there's any lesson we're going to take out of this, which I don't think we will, because it's really disappointing to see it, but if your argument is that a public health model actually works, then we should have learned as a nation that we have to better resource our public health entities and the people that do that kind of work. And I don't see us doing that right now. That's not the lesson we seem to have taken from this. We just want to get back to pouring people back into the funnel again, as though that's going to solve the problem. So that's my perspective on it. We've stayed together throughout this entire process, and we've worked very closely. That is a function of a relationship that we started over 15, almost 20 years ago, and a commitment to continue working with each other to try to improve the criminal justice system. Everybody up here got into public service, remains in public service because they believe in trying to make the community a better place. This has horrified us. Having the highest rates of homicide and non-fatal shooting has horrified everybody up here. We're doing everything we can to try to get that back under control, but you're not going to see anybody pointing fingers at one another because we all share this. And at the end of the day, what we want to do is get back to a place where we can at least prevent some of these, intervene intelligently, and use our system as sort of the last resort. But we're not there yet. We're going to keep working really hard to get there. And my hope is that by the end of this year, we'll be somewhat back to, like I say, that crappy place we were in 2019.
So my next question is for Tom Reed. Tom, I've seen you on TV shows and newspapers talking about how difficult it has been for you as an office to appoint attorneys to handle these cases, which has also contributed to the backlog. Could you explain that and also tell what is being done in the process to try to knock down that lag time between defendants getting attorneys and those attorneys being able to appear in court?
Sure. So, of course, after a case is charged, the person who is facing those charges has a right to a lawyer. And as a simple matter of the reality of our criminal justice system, the majority of people who are charged with criminal offenses are also indigent and they qualify for public defender representation. It's north of 85% of the people who are charged with crimes. So the sort of relationship between poverty and all of the things that go with poverty. And in this room, there have been lots of people much more able than I am to speak to the complexity of enduring poverty on the lives of so many people. That one of the places that shows up is in our criminal justice system and in the appointments that our office and agency must make for people who are eligible for a lawyer. Historically, we have had, so just to make it clear, I have a staff that does about half of the appointments, and then we have private bar attorneys who take our appointments. Some of those are what we call conflict cases, and some are just overflow cases. At times when we've been fully staffed, our staff would maybe do 60% of the cases, but there's always been a substantial private bar component. What was probably happening when we were in 2019, before we knew what was about to happen, is if you looked at those demographics of those two groups, they skewed a little bit older, and there would be, in terms of organizational planning, a thought, boy, we really need to bring more people into this work because it will continue, unfortunately, and we need to have people trained to do the work. And these more serious cases take the greatest skill. I mean, it's self-evident that they would. What happened when 2022 hit was that we found a lot of lawyers, some staff, probably more in the private bar, who were at an age where they thought to themselves, I just don't want to continue practicing. I'm going to take this option to retire. And you might say, well, why did they do that? But I think you have to understand that in order to visit clients, and at that time, the majority of serious cases still were people in custody, involved the perception, I think very realistic perception, of exposure to a very dangerous virus. There were some periods where we had over 100 people at the House of Correction who had COVID-19, and it was a deadly disease. There were no vaccines for it. And so we lost a lot of capacity, especially at that more experienced end. And so we went from a situation where typically we were appointing cases out more or less as they came in, with a few cases being difficult for whatever combination of reasons, to a circumstance which is fortunately much better today. But a year ago, we probably on any given day had over 400 people who were longer than 30 days waiting for a lawyer. And I can't even begin to tell you how incredibly difficult that is if you're in the position I'm in, to have people, they're in custody, they don't have a lawyer. In many cases, these were conflict cases, so we really could have only the most limited kinds of conversations with them about what was going on.
Tom, could I ask you to clarify conflict cases? So for those who don't know.
Simple way of saying it is that there might be 3 individuals who are charged in a particular case. Our office would take one of the defendants, and the other 2 have to have lawyers outside of our office in order to be fairly represented. That's an easy example. So you can imagine when we had this shortage of lawyers, what it meant for everything that was going on in the system. It meant that the cases before the 2 judges to my left could not proceed because nothing can get done until there's a lawyer appointed. What it also means is that the lawyers who were taking the cases were taking as many cases, and frankly, maybe a few more than what they could comfortably handle. So they were coming into court and saying, look, Judge, I'm doing my best, but I can't get to all the discovery, or there's some legal issue that needs exploration. There's a medical or psychiatric issue. We're waiting for the doctor's report to come in. That's going to be delayed by 3 or 4 weeks. And so even with the cases where we had lawyers, we had delays. But with that big shortage, we had just a ripple effect. And then, of course, we would get a lawyer for somebody who'd been waiting for 60 or 80 days. And they would be frustrated, like anyone would be. And so, this is the lawyer? I waited 80 days for this idiot to come here, right? I mean, and I want somebody who's going to take seriously the business of getting me out of here. And I'm not hearing that from this lawyer. So the lawyer had to get off, and then we have to find a new lawyer. We're down to about 100 cases, and that might sound like a lot of progress, but where I sit, that's horrible, right? It's just horrible to even have it at that level. The legislature, this past biennial budget, made significant investments in the criminal justice system that raised the rate for our private bar attorneys. We've seen the effect of that. That has definitely improved what's going on. It has stabilized our staff because we had a lot of staff departures during that time period. And like Rob mentioned, you bring young people in, they can't represent people in homicides or armed robbery cases. They have to learn how to do the more basic things. So we're still struggling with these labor force dislocations, but they're better today than they were. And they do have a significant impact on the backlogs that we're talking about.
All right, so for a way of background, so I'm going to ask both of the chief judges. So January 2020, I should say, I think it was the 6th, in 2020, Wisconsin Supreme Court says no more in-person hearings, no more jury trials. So as soon as you and your deputy at the time, Judge Ashley, what do you do right at that moment when you can't have any more in-person hearings? All of them halted as a result of the order by the Supreme Court.
Sure, and I can start. First, I would say that they, whoever they is, said that the pandemic would only last for 2 weeks, right? So it was clear it was going to last longer, and I think Milwaukee County pulled together this team up here, and we actually sent people home earlier because we knew the pandemic was breathing down our throats, and we wanted to make sure people were safe, because who knew? We heard people were dying, right? So we were very careful in meeting to do that. And then we knew right away, as we planned crisis after crisis, that we were going to have to recover at the same time and bring people back, right, to do those jury trials that were so important, to get people as much into the courthouse or courtroom as possible, even if it meant by Zoom or other audio or phone methods, because we knew that our backlogs would start to grow and continue to grow if we did not come back up, especially to do jury trials. And so we worked day and night and day, weekends, to try to get that done and bring people back into the courthouse as needed to do jury trials. We were worried about jurors as well. Can't do a jury trial without jurors. Can't bring jurors in unless they know they're safe. And so that was in and of itself an exercise in trying to make sure that the message from us, clerk of courts, was that people were going to be safe when they came in to do their cases. So we came back up as quickly as we could, and slowly but surely we started doing jury trials in the summer of 2020 when most people weren't doing jury trials.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Marquette, Derek, and Rob for the report. I think it was all very important. The Community Justice Council has always, in the judicial system, and my partners up here, rely on data. Data informs our decisions, helps us make better decisions, so it's extraordinarily important to get that information to help us kind of look at the landscape. But I want to paint the picture, and I think it's been articulated by my colleagues up here. COVID was a big deal. I don't know if you don't forget, but when it happened, it was like out-of-body experience. No one's going anywhere. People are locked down. My chief judge at the time did extraordinary work keeping us up and running to the extent that she could. Her leadership was calm and consistent and allowed us to do more than a lot of other people did during COVID. So I don't want people to forget what we're dealing with and how we had to.
Lost this guy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mary had to deal with that. Yep.
So with that context, I want you to understand
Bless
that
you.
bless you, that there's a lot that we still have to do as a society to deal with these numbers. And it isn't all great numbers. But I'm an optimist. And I think we have opportunity. One of the things the chief and I always talked about, can we come up different? Can we utilize this as an opportunity to move forward in a different way? And we have done that. With regards to meeting, the collaboration with our system partners, other people, other jurisdictions say, how do you guys get along? We met consistently to try to figure out the best way to tackle COVID and the implications for our system. It was hard work, scary work, because people were rightfully frightened about what was going on. To Tom's point, we lost a lot of staff across the board, court reporters, attorneys, clerks, people who said, you know what, time for me to go. We have slowly started replacing folks. We've got new clerks, we've got new judges, we've got new ADAs, we've got new defense attorneys, all coming up to speed. And as we try to adjust to deal with the numbers, and by the way, thanks for pointing it out, Rob, if we didn't have pending cases, we wouldn't be in business. So we have pending cases up to the number about 5,000, and 1,500 of that are considered backlog. Our effort is to figure out how not only can we deal with the backlog, but how can we do things differently? It's been alluded to, mental health. How have we handled mental health as a society, as a system? Most of the people involved with significant mental health issues shouldn't be in the criminal justice system. They should be funneled outside of that, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to take a look at that, and we are meeting. I'm meeting tomorrow morning, continuing the struggles to try to figure out how we as a system can do things differently. And let me just point this out. I'll take this opportunity that we are not going to prison our way out of our public safety issues. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Some people, because of what they've done, need to be incapacitated, incarcerated. Okay, that's a given. That's a given. 95% of the people incarcerated are going to get out. So the question, ladies and gentlemen, are what are we going to do to make sure when they get out and are back in the community that they do better? Not only for them, but their families. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us to do things differently. With the backlog in mind, we're still working on that. I'll be meeting them tomorrow, talking about the backlog. And our system partners will be around the table trying to see how we can be more efficient and supportive of each other. And by the way, I am extraordinarily proud of that working relationship that we have. And Mary was a huge part of that as my colleague. But I'm going to go back to you because I know you want something else to be said.
No. Yeah, so I just have a question. John, you mentioned domestic violence cases. And the thing that was troubling to me in that report was it's not just domestic violence cases coming to the DA's office. It's either Sojourner Truth House.
Absolutely. So again, that just is indicative that our theory was right. Our theory in the creation of a place like the Sojourner Family Peace Center was that you could better serve a victim and her entire family and place them back into the community in a safer and healthier spot if you wrap the entire community's resources around them in a safe location. You shut that down, and again, in a tragic way, the data supports what happens, and that is that we've seen unprecedented levels of serious violence and homicides that have been domestic violence related. So again, to me, it just, again, proves the point. We're on the right track. We're on the right track to try to put our resources on scale where they're most needed. Early intervention in young kids' lives, making sure that they have the school system. You shut a school system down, and then you're shocked that a bunch of young kids are stealing cars and driving recklessly. Well, the entire school system was down for 18 months. I mean, everything's connected to everything, right? And so, the final thing I was going to say, though, is that the Community Justice Council has always been committed to transparency, even when transparency is, it's going to be painful. So I just want to thank Rob, because he's been with us from the get-go. And the 6 months prior to the release of the report, I'll be the first to say, we were like, do we really want to report out on this? It's just all going to be bad numbers. It's just all going to be bad. And we know that there are people that are not interested in rationally discussing the things. They want to use it as a weapon against you. But we've always remained committed to that. So this was an invited response. We asked Rob to do this along with the Argosy Foundation to take a deep dive, because actually what we wanted to do was make an argument to the legislature that, hey, you need to start investing in your criminal justice system. Well, as it turns out, they finally got that message, at least as it relates to paying prosecutors. You want to know how they got the message? It's when Dodge County melted down and every single one of their district attorneys just quit. An entire county's representation just quit, just left. And finally the message got through that there's something not right about how we're compensating public safety professionals. And Jeff is down from, at least 300 from what I remember when I first started running. You had almost 2,000 officers. You're down about 300, 350 in that general range. Public defenders are struggling to bring people in. The courts everyone's been impacted, but we've continued to be able to attract really great public servants. Just can't keep them. Hopefully we can keep them in the future.
So before I open it up to some questions, he mentioned you, Chief Norman. What do you need? If you could have, what do you need now to help out the situation? What do you need? If you could have anything you wanted, would it be officers? Would it be, what you said before, funneling things to other sources other than the police department?
And I know this sounds always cliche or something when I say this, but what I need more is trust from everyone, from elected leaders, from our community, from those partners. We are getting better, and we're getting back to some of this, because with trust comes all the other things. If you trust the organization to do right with the resources, then you ask for more resources. We are still dealing with a lot of unfortunate trauma within our systems, within our relationships. Even I, as a CEO of the department, have to get past some of the old hurts and whatnot. But we're getting better, and I think this is a representation, if you've seen other Lubar presentations, where we are in a better place in regards to being able to work with each other and be force multipliers. These things, and this report does point out that there are things that we need to examine and see what we can do for more resources or how we can think more innovatively. And so for me, and I always say this, and this is just going to be a broken record, trusting us that we'll do right with the responsibility of being law enforcement, but being part of the whole spectrum of policing. Policing is a community effort. That's not just us, and so that is something that when we have the ability to have that trust where our community residents support us in our efforts, we have support, Alderman Spiker's here, from our elected officials in regards that we're going to do right with our finite resources, we're giving more. I think that really is the impetus to making sure that all the other things fall in line with that particular first quality trust.
Tom Reed, what do you need?
I think what I would say we need is to be able to better tell the story of what remarkable work it is that is done by the people who each of these agencies represent. I mean, it is a noble calling to help people when they are facing these really terrible problems. And whether it's our clients who face consequences for things they're accused of doing, frankly, I have to say a lot of our clients were yesterday's victims, and I'm not saying that there's a moral equivalence. I'm just saying that people get into trouble because of things that have happened to them in their lives. And we need people who love policing and love neighborhoods and communities. We need prosecutors who love the law and who want to work carefully, as prosecutors must, to do things. We need judges who are going to listen carefully to what it is that is going on. But more than anything, we need the public at large to be inspired by this really core responsibility that we have as civilized people to bring into this work the most talented people, the most dedicated people, and honor them for the work, and not have the environment where if something goes wrong or there's a mistake or somebody is released from jail that maybe they shouldn't have been, that there's a cascade of negativity that lands on their heads. I heard this said the other day. If a bridge collapses, we don't say we should get rid of bridges. What we do is we try to fix the bridges. If a plane crashes, we don't say, well, no one's going to travel by airplane. We try to figure out what's going on. When we have problems in our system, the message that we need is it's still noble work, and the people there we need to trust them, but we also need to figure out how to avoid some of those mistakes. And so that's, I think, what we need is a really inspiring story because it's there to be told.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I'm going to open it up for questions. Hillary's going to come around with a microphone.
I'll go there.
Hi, I'm a minister at a local church, and the reason I'm bringing this up is I think that there's an attitudinal thing that's been in our play, and it came into existence right around the time that COVID did, and it had to do a lot with the incident in Minneapolis, where we, on a societal level, are instituting a lot of decisions. You look, for example, at San Francisco, where they decided not to prosecute shoplifting unless you shoplifted over, I think, $900 worth of stuff. So in other words, the crime would take place, but the crime wouldn't be prosecuted. And that's just an attitudinal thing that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I think we're putting a lot of people, like the police officers, in a position where they feel like they are massively underappreciated and overwhelmed, and then they give up and say, what's the point? You're telling me to do a job I can't do because you're telling me I can't do the job you put me here to do. And I think that we need to consider these things because attitudinal things, by definition, are something you almost can't quantify. So there's larger cultural attitudes at work in our society that are shifting, I think, and causing a lot of these issues we're dealing with.
I'm sure Chief has an answer to that, because I've heard you answer a question like that before in the past.
What was the question? I thought it was more of a comment, or
It is more of a comment, but
right.
You said something that stuck out to me because we did a presentation before, and someone had mentioned that police don't feel like they just throw their hands up, they don't want to do it, and you had a response to that.
Yes, but I don't want to be characterized, I'm speaking for the entire department. It's always anecdotal, but we do hear in regards to that frustration in regards to trying to do your job, trying to do the work, and there is lack of appreciation. It swings both ways. I say that a lot of times we have to do a better job of working with our community and being more responsive to it, but we do like to hear that good work, the feedback that the work that we're doing is being noticed. Again, like I mentioned before, we had the COVID-19, and very few organizations, very few establishments were working in person. And working is not just via Zoom or whatever. We couldn't Zoom our way out in law enforcement. So there is a part where there's a lot of that. I'm glad that it was mentioned in regards to the work that we're doing is noble. The work that the men and women are doing and reassuring, and that's where it comes again, where it's a symbiotic circle of, yes, we need trust, but we also have to earn trust and continue to earn trust. We also need that support in regards to the work that we're doing, because one of the things that was noted in the report, and it is true, that some of the burnout, some of the frustration, people left early, whereas people were able to work up to 25 years and be out, or 30 years. There's individuals who are taking time and age, meaning that they were less than the full benefits of being able to retire at 25 because of those frustrations. But I don't like to say is any particular person's fault at all these things. We all have a hand in being better, doing better, working better, and I think that we continue to have these conversations, continue to be engaging, we're able to have a better understanding where both perspectives come from.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, 40 years ago, I served on the Milwaukee County Mental Health Association board. And we're sitting here 40 years later talking about the same thing. And I really think, I respect all of you up there, that we have the wrong people. We need to be talking to the people who work with people with mental health issues, doctors, people with drug and alcohol issues. We're talking about after we've let them we've not helped them, and now they're up being reviewed for going to jail. But we need to help them before that, it seems to me. And Judge Ashley mentioned, I think you referred to, that you're going to be meeting with someone tomorrow. I hope it's with drug and mental health. Just this week, we've been out 3 days, and 2 of those 3 days, we drove past 2 separate situations where the fire department, not the police department, but the fire department was there, and here was people having it appeared to be drug abuse problems, laying on the side of the street. And, you know, where's the fire department? So, Judge Ashley, do you have any thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you for your comment. I mean, I think it's very important for all of us. I think most of us understand that mental health issues, trauma issues, substance abuse issues need to be addressed. And we are trying to do that. We have our drug treatment court, we have our veterans treatment court, we have healthy infant court, we have courts that are problem-solving courts to allow people an opportunity at different outcomes. But to your other point, that shouldn't be the only stop. We should reach them earlier. We should, and that's a community problem, and that's what we need to let our legislators know. And there are some who are with us that we need to finance, support more opportunities to reach people before they get to that point. And that also applies to children and the parents. If we reached out sooner, the trajectory of these young people would be so much different. And so I appreciate you saying that, sir.
Do we have time for one more?
We have one more question? Here, oh, you got one.
Press where it says press.
No, here you go. No, those are on.
Right.
Those are off.
It's on? Okay. Besides the COVID disparity that we had, and you said that more trust, and with the residential, no requirement for the residential no longer. And you come into our community, or come into the community where there's a disconnect because you make your money and you go out of the community. Isn't that kind of difficult to build a trust? And that was even before COVID, you know. So the trust kind of left the community, because how you going to trust someone when you're not part of the community?
I get that, and you know, the challenge is that, you know, that's been decided at higher levels than me in regards to having that freedom to live and what the rules of engagement for living. I will say this in response to that protective behavior. When an officer responds to your particular situation, I don't think anybody's asking where you live. If anything, I think they're looking at how are you carrying yourself professionally. How are you, again, we want compassion and empathy, and I look at it from a standpoint of accountability. Leadership putting in place, ensuring that the quality of the services you receive, no matter where you live, I don't care if you live on Mars, that you are going to be answerable to the service, the expectation that everyone would deliver service, and that there is an accountability aspect if you don't deliver that particular service. Don't file that report, you disrespect someone, you do something that is out of line of what we expect as the Milwaukee Police Department. It's not enough, and I say this for everyone, it's not enough to talk to your colleagues about it. You need to tell us. We have so many ways to bring in complaints, whether you can email it, you can, you know, send probably a carrier pigeon or whatever. The thing is, it's important that it's not enough to be able to say, you know what, just talk to my friend down the street. That was so disrespectful what the police department did, because I will say this, I can never say that there would never be a mistake out there. That would be foolish. But what I can say is, it ain't gonna happen again. Because it's important for us as leaders to understand that, you know, no matter where you live, no matter what you call home or your prior position of being home, you better deliver the service that is expected for the taxpaying, for the individuals who live and reside and work and play in the city of Milwaukee.
All right. Well, I want to take this time to thank all of you for coming today to today's forum on the issues, and I want to thank Rob Henken from the Wisconsin Policy Forum, Tom Reed from the State Public Defender's Office, Mary Triggiano, now Director of the Andrews Center, Chief Judge Carl Ashley, District Attorney John Chisholm, and Milwaukee Police Chief Jeffrey Norman for coming and giving their time. And also, before we give a clap, I also want to thank in the back the person that you probably have more contact with for these events, Hillary DuBois. She's the one who answers all your emails. So could everybody please give a round of applause? And we hope to see you for our next programming, October 11th. We have Jackie Carter. The 12th, we have Representative Mike Gallagher. And the 20th, we have Kara Fitzpatrick, Death of Public Schools. Everybody have a great day.